by the Bureau of Automotive Repair on collision repair proposals, regulatory proposals that we have been working on, since late last year, I think, following a presentation we gave to our bar advisory group in October of 2018. We got some comments that led us to believe, and we were probably headed in this direction already, but convinced us that the time couldn't be, it was time for updating our regulations as it related to auto body or collision related repairs. We have started with a draft that we've produced today in hard copy form. We have sent it to our bar advisory group members who met earlier today. A meeting took place on a bunch of various topics with a very full agenda that ran over the allotted meeting time. But we had a really fruitful discussion on a lot of different topics, and we see that a few, I see looking around the room that there are a few who have returned from the bar advisory group meeting to participate in the workshop today. So thank you all for coming back. And we are webcasting this. We always like to make sure that we have participation for those who cannot physically be in the room with us today, to let them know that they're welcome and that they are encouraged to participate. And we have a mechanism for providing input to the discussion. That's our email address on the webcast is barmeeting@dca.ca.gov. Again, it's barmeeting, all one word, at dca.ca.gov. Okay, so this started out after our bar advisory group presentation. That's all right. That's how you access it. I gave the email address to send comments. That's all right. I wasn't clear about that. Yes, everybody presumably who's participating on the webcast has already accessed it at the address that was on the meeting notice. I was just merely giving the address to provide input or comments or questions during the presentation today. Thank you, Jean, though, for reminding me. Where did I say? Oh, we had a presentation and a little live demo in our courtyard here at the Department of Consumer Affairs. That was at the October meeting. Mark Guess and Michelle Oberg did a really good job talking about issues relating to collision repair. And following that, I think there was a recommendation, or maybe we just thought it was necessary. We organized an internal working group within BAR with some of our experts within the technical training unit, where both Michelle and Mark work, as well as some of our collision repair experts who came from that segment of the industry, much like Mark did. Jaime, Mike, Clausy, and probably some others in the room that I'm leaving out. But we felt it necessary to start putting kind of pen to paper to look at some updating of our current regulations. Some of these regulations, as you'll hear, haven't been touched since 1997. So the vehicle has changed dramatically. The technology out there so far advanced from where we were in 1997. So it was high time for us to start looking at a way to kind of providing some clarity to some of the existing regulations, as well as updating things that might have been outdated. So this is our first opportunity to kind of discuss it with everyone. This is potentially, I think, just the tip of the iceberg. There are systems that we haven't even, like ADAS systems and things like that. But I think we got to kind of gently get into this without throwing too much on the industry all at once. So that's our plan. This is a starter, but by no means an ending place for this. So keep that in mind. when you're looking at this and listening to the presentation. This is not going to be the last opportunity to add to this. I'd like to get, I think for those who are at the bar advisory group meeting, that iterative process, you know, that what they call that agile iterative process where you get accomplishments and some things on the books sooner than later, and not try to do everything all at once, because that can take years. And this will take years. This could potentially take a while to get done, even just the smallest incremental changes. But trying to bite off too much at one time, I think it could take a decade to get things through if we tried to do. And by then, the technology will have changed again, right? So I think it behooves us to try and deal with this in small incremental steps and not take off too much all at one time. So keep that in mind. That's kind of our goal, knowing that we will have other things to address, but maybe not all today and not all in this package. But I think we will entertain some comments, but we'll probably draw a line at some point. So. All right, I'm going to turn it over to our presenters. It's Michelle Oberg and Mark Guess from the Technical Training Unit, who you've already met, presumably, when they presented at the Bar Advisory Group meeting last October.
Thank you, Chief DeRay. Good afternoon to everybody in the room and everybody watching via the webcast. My name is Michelle Oberg. I'm here to present minimally myself, but to present with Mark Guess this workshop. We'll just want to give you a little bit of heads up of how we're going to do this. We're going to go through a short presentation, and then we will, in an attempt to keep things organized, go through the different regulations that we're looking at and we're talking about today, and open it up for discussion after that. Okay, I'm going to basically regurgitate a lot of what Chief DeRay has already talked to you about. This all started with a regulatory workshop that we had last October in response to some industry concerns and other stakeholders and bar zone recognition of some areas that needed to be addressed with regards to the collision repair landscape. We, in part, discussed our current regulations, the emerging technologies, the training environment, and ultimately decided that an internal bar work group was a good idea to get some of us together to take a deeper dive into to some of the issues. So this work group consists of some executive and upper level management. It consists of some legislation, regulation experts, and also collision repair staff that have experience in the collision repair industry, and myself. I'm more of a facilitator, try to keep things organized in the group. So we meet regularly to discuss our regulations relating to collision repair and explore areas for additions, revisions, and updates. Initially we went really broad. We looked at a lot of things like Chief DeRay alluded to, like the advanced driver assistance systems. And when you get so much stuff on the table, you realize it really helps to take a phase-in approach. So we decided to kind of pare down this initial exploration into just a few different regulation areas, which we are going to discuss today. Before I hand it off to Mark, I do want to remind you, as Chief DeRay did, that this is an ongoing process. We're going to be working on this. Our work group is going to go on for a while. We'll continue to work on these emerging issues in the collision repair industry and to see what we can do with them. So at this point, I'm going to hand it off to Mark, and he'll take you into the presentation.
Thank you, Michelle. Today we're going to be discussing 3 different amended proposals for regulations relating to collision repairs. We are actively, as Michelle and both Pat mentioned, working on additional regulations. I can kind of give you some backdrop on that. One of the things we're working on is automated driving systems, which is the highest level of autonomy, and bringing it back down to ADAS. So that it would encompass all the technology as it actually develops. The other thing would be we're looking into potentially revamping 3365A, which is the trade standards for auto body repairs and how they be repaired in California, just to make sure that it's actually going to work with some of the new regulations that are being proposed and things like that. We're also going to look into continually. Structural repair and replacement of structural parts and what that constitutes and whether or not that fits into 3365A specifically, or if it's a breakout regulation such as 3365 A2 or something like that, whether it's separated or not. And as these technologies advance, as we know they are daily, we're going to have to adjust. We're adjusting even in our unit as we're finding out different things and keeping up with the pulse as best as we can as far as the changing technologies that are going on every day in that industry. It happens daily. Then we're going to go to some of the needs for the regulations are, of course, we're talking about technology, but the equipment that's required to repair a modern day vehicle can be extensive. And it can be very specific to that vehicle build. And it's areas of that we want to make sure that the vehicles are being restored and the collision management systems are set back in the condition that they were pre-accident, so we don't get consumers harmed and things of that nature. We adopted regulations for equipment requirements in 1997. And I think you'll see with the proposed amended regulations that you'll see that there was some specific terminology, like for a MIG welder and parameters of that. It's too defined because the welding's changed too much. And there's too much technology. There's different types of welding rods, different types of shielding gases, and things of that nature. So we did attempt to still address the welding and in a more direct, but yet more of a, hopefully it'll catch all welding in that particular area. So we're going to clarify some of the requirements for auto body repair, the industry. That was the intention, and a big intention for the group is to provide the clarity that the industry greatly needs, so that they can actually do the repairs, do them correctly, and actually put the vehicles back into a safe condition whenever the consumer gets the vehicle back. We also want to provide clarity to not only the industry stakeholders, but to ensure the customers of California receive a proper and safe repair, clear in terms that they can understand, and not, as much of this stuff that can be muddied up at times. So we're going to look at the first three that we're talking about. All these are Title 16 California Code of Regulations that are being amended or proposed to be amended. 3303 definitions, and they're specifically towards automotive crash parts or collision crash parts. 3351.5, which is the auto body specifics for equipment requirements, and then supplemental restraint systems. Supplemental restraint systems has not been updated since 2002, so that's kind of overdue as well. The proposed Title 16 regs that we're talking about is we've proposed, and I'm just going to talk in very, very brief terms. This is a really short PowerPoint, and then we'll get into it whenever we get into more of the discussion in the workshop, very specific language and things like that. But we've added bonded glass to 3303, identifying what a crash part is, 3303O, if you will. And proposed in 3303P, additional clarity for the manufacturer crash part, OEM crash part. And then in 3303Q, we provided further clarity on what constitutes a aftermarket non-OEM crash part. So in 3351.5, which is the equipment requirements, we did a new subsection that generally talks about they should have, the ARD should have the equipment necessary and manuals for the type of vehicles that are being repaired. Obviously, I'm just going to clarify early on that they can sublet a repair if they do not have that equipment. And according to the manufacturer's specifications as far as the repairs and the equipment use is concerned. Then we used the added B, which used to be our A, and it combines several types of, this one is just the cleanup part of the regulation. We had in corrosion protection on our equipment requirements. We had it in listed as number 1, and then part of it was in number 2, and a lot of it was contained in number 5. Just for clarity, we tried to move it and encapsulate it so it's in one area. Not much of a language change at all, if any, and moved it into a more readable for the user that's trying to maintain their business in a lawful manner regarding corrosion protection. And then C, we addressed structural repair replacement according to manufacturer specifications as well, and we'll be talking in depth about that. But the main thing that we did add, it reinforces following the manufacturer specifications and guidelines, along with using the equipment that is required to repair that vehicle within those guidelines. So we did an update on 3367 of this CC&R, and that would be the, it used to be called the inflatable restraint system or airbags, and now the new name of that regulation would be the supplemental restraint system. A identifies the various components as it relates to the supplemental restraint system, and according to that section. In new subsection B would be repairs are to be performed as manufacturer specifications when you're fixing a supplemental restraint system. And then in A, which is now the new C, it was already in regulation, and it talked about relates to installing previously deployed airbags, which is against the law, of course. And then in the new subsection D, it prohibits disabling or supplemental restraint systems unless there's a National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or NHTSA, exemption has been issued for that airbag to be either turned off, and in some instances you can get an exemption for the airbags to be removed. And then the new subsection E would be new subsection E is a disciplinary action for doing such, not restoring the airbags or installing an inflatable restraint system that is known or should have been known to be, previously deployed or not functioning. So, in the disciplinary action language did say the same. So in a second here, I'm going to turn it back to Michelle for a minute. We're not going to go into open discussion quite yet. We're going to provide some information to everybody, I believe, so that if you have to contact us, either one of us.
Yeah, so we'd like you to get this information out to you prior to the open discussion, in case it gets lost to the shuffle. And this is where you can submit your questions and or comments to, for those of you that are just listening and need to write this information down. For technical questions, I'm going to give you 2 different email addresses. One is mine, first name Michelle, MICHELLE, dot Oberg, OBERG, at dca.ca.gov. The other technical questions can be sent to Mark Guest. That's Mark, M-A-R-K, dot Guest, G-U-E-S-S, at dca.ca.gov. Any regulatory questions can be sent to Holly O'Connor. That's Holly, H-O-L-L-Y, dot O'Connor, O-C-O-N-N-O-R, at dca.ca.gov. Okay, Mark, I'll hand it back to you to lead the open discussion.
Okay, thank you. We're going to be discussing 3303 definitions. as it relates to crash parts. I'm going to start off with 33030. Primarily, the only change besides for removing an or so that it would actually roll into the sentence correctly is we added bonded glass to a crash part. I'll get you on mic.
I'll repeat the question. What are the chances of getting?
Radiators and air conditioning condensers added to the list of, because they're not mechanically.
Yeah, that's something that we could certainly consider and take under advisement and put that in, notes so that we could actually address that as a group. The main reason that we focused on bonded glass is because of like the windshields and stuff in that nature. It's so imperative if folks don't know, I'm a big proponent of learning about windshields and stuff, and we put it in there for that specific purpose because of the fact that the vehicle itself, the windshield's a crash part by itself, just in the fact that the side or the passenger side airbag deploys and uses that at about a 200-mile-an-hour impact to keep and bounce off for the consumer to actually not get hurt if they're riding in the passenger side. The other thought process on that, just so you know, was that so that the actual it holds the A-pillar, as we were aware, and all that kind of stuff. But certainly we can address, or we could look into that feat and see if that would be appropriate and address it. And I appreciate your comment.
Mark?
Yes, sir.
Gene Lopez with Seidner's Collision Center. Regarding bonded glass, I don't know that that's an industry understood part name. Perhaps laminated glass, when we're speaking of a windshield, that glass is laminated, piece of glass, something in the middle of it, polyethylene material of some sort, and then a piece of glass. Bonded glass to the industry is something that is adhered to the body of the vehicle, whether it's in a pinch weld or a side glass. So I'm not sure that bonded glass is the right term to be used.
Yeah, I love that input. That's great input. I would just like to say one thing on that. The reason that our thought process is that we're not totally stuck on that, of course, but it would be that the bonded glass also, we know are in quarter panels and sometimes in the back opening of the back window. And those actually have been identified by several manufacturers as part of the collision management system as well.
Sure.
So we didn't want to leave the folks for the back glasses and side glasses out of that equation is what I'm saying. But we could certainly look at some more different kind of language, kind of thoughts, so it's more universal. Okay.
Yeah, I think ICAR uses the term stationary glass.
Okay.
So that might be a preferred term. And to Pete's question about radiators and condensers, I'm wondering if we couldn't compile a list of crash parts. So we've identified a crash part, or excuse me, we've defined a crash. We've defined a crash part, but I don't know that we have a list of what, is a bumper a crash part? Is a radiator a crash part? Is a fender a crash part? Is a hood or a roof a crash part? A deck lid a crash part? Is a headlamp or a tail light a crash part?
You can certainly take a look at that, for sure.
Yeah, so if there could be a list of sort, you mentioned A-pillar, definitely not a crash part, right? Rocker panel, definitely not a crash part. And I don't know that there's so many of them that there could not be a list, and that would, include all the stakeholders to provide. And maybe ICAR has that list. I don't know that.
Well, yeah, Dave Robinette with ICAR. Crash parts or a crash part list is an interesting concept to try to wrap your head around, because there are so many different components on the vehicle that are designed as the structural part of the vehicle to take the impact, collapse, redirect the energy, that sort of thing. And so when you start looking at what a crash part is in the usual vernacular, that has to do with energy management. If we're talking about a piece of glass as an energy management component of the vehicle, then it could possibly be construed to be a crash part under this conversation here, whereas glass in and of itself generally hasn't been used in that same type of a category. But today it becomes more and more of a stabilizing part of the structure.
Yeah, and so see, Dave, you started to recognize crash parts as structural components. In this language, it's a fender, a door. Help me out, Jaime. What else? A hood. Perhaps not a roof. But you see what I'm saying? So your definition of a crash part is a structural component. I think in this regulation, a crash part could be a cosmetic repair component, if you will.
Yeah, and you're not necessarily wrong on that at all. I think you're right in that there are components of the vehicle that are not structural or weight bearing, or several different ways you can refer to that, but do have a bracing effect to the overall strength of the vehicle. So a quarter panel is a generally bonded or welded on type of a component on the vehicle, but in and of itself, it's a flimsy piece of metal until you attach it to the vehicle. So is it a crash part or is it not? And I guess you get back to the concept of what is designed to absorb energy and redirect it and all that. That could be one way to look at it. And then there could be a separate category that is secondary, I'm just throwing this out, a secondary bracing, structural crash part, that sort of thing, like a roof panel or a quarter panel or a radiator support or some such thing like that. That could be easily a contributing component, but not necessarily a structural part. So when we throw the term crash part out there, there may be a need for some definition, sub-definition.
I don't know that it needs to be. I don't know that there needs to be a definition, but a list, right?
Yeah.
Because a hood is going to have different crash components to it as compared to a fender, right? A hood has crumple zones and what are the other? So a hood is going to have properties in it engineered to avoid going into the passenger compartment. A fender's not going to have anything like that. A fender is just going to fold up. Yeah, we need some kind of a list. And a core support that holds the radiator and the condenser, probably not a crash part. But the radiator and condenser on the repairer side, crash parts. Headlamps, crash parts. Taillights, crash parts. So we need to come up with that list.
You can certainly look into that for sure. And thank you for your comments. Any other comments on O?
Hi, Bud Rice with Quality Tune-Up Shops. I've got two quick comments or questions. One of them is, I think, and Gene, you have to step up and help me here. The insurance companies also play a key role in here, and sometimes the shops get wedged in a position of what they want to do to fix the car in their mind correctly, and what the insurance companies will do or pay for from their perspective, and a shop is caught in this wedge all the time. So I'm not sure what their level of participation is to make sure that we can do the right stuff to the right cars, so the shops are doing the right work. So that's my first comment. Second comment is, I'm not sure what this means for fleets. In other words, if you have a fleet of cars and they're your cars, how do the rules and regulations relate to that when it's your stuff and it's not a customer stuff, it's your stuff? Because even when that vehicle's on the road, everybody around it is still playing a part of what goes on with that vehicle. So if fleets are not part of this, it's likely that they could be endangering people that are around them if the vehicles aren't done correctly. So those are my 2 comments.
All right, thank you very much. I'd like to say something to that, the last comment. That particular, when you talk about fleet vehicles and things of that nature, it's a little troubling, especially when we start moving to fully, or at least more autonomous features. And if the fleets folks are not playing, or they're taking things off or changing that or altering it or maybe not recalibrating like it's necessary, that's very troubling. But this doesn't really address fleets. Thank you for your comments.
Can you hear me now? Okay, Jack Molodanoff. About the lists. I mean, drafting lists is challenging because, you want to add something in and then things change over the years. So, lists get outdated pretty quickly sometimes. And I'm the one that always harps about changing regulations. They take so long. So we need to make sure we consider how we handle a list, because the last thing we want is to spend a lot of time on creating a list and then all of a sudden a year later, 2 years, it gets outdated and we need to add to the list or subtract from the list. And anyway, I just wanted to make that comment. And then the other thing in terms of the current BAR, I guess, policy or how they interpret currently crash parts. I mean, is there a policy? Do you consider radiators, condensers, are they considered crash parts or no?
Typically at this stage, no.
No, okay.
I'd like to make a comment to your first comment, if I could, sorry. Thank you for your comments, by the way. But
You're welcome for the comment.
Thank you. The comment that you made about the list would be very encompassing and very challenging and almost impossible to do. The reason why is maybe a vehicle manufacturer might identify certain components as a crash part and other manufacturers may not. So if you made a totality type of a list of it, it may not be one size fits all. And then, that leads to a lot of problems in regulation. And I've known you a long time, Jack, and I know that you've changed a lot of regulations for us and done a lot of really good things. And the thing is that you're right, because we could be talking about something today, and within 2 weeks, it can be different in the collision industry right now. I mean, I was going to throw it out later, but I was just going to tell you this because everybody thinks I bumped my head, but I was reading repair-driven news, and they were talking about how they have these laser, they call them, what is it? I don't know. They measure it in picos, which is trillionths of a second. And the laser can actually do trillionths of a second pulse on glass and weld it to steel. So they're talking about the potential of it actually eliminating urethane for like windshields and things of that nature. And they're talking about that they're projecting out that in the future they may just sell you both the windshield and all the steel that goes with it, and you have to put the steel in. And I'm thinking, man, that is really, really advanced scientific kind of stuff to me. NASA's involved and things like that. And it's just
We'll be dead.
Thank you for your comments.
So Jack, thanks for that. And I get that a list could be extensive, but Jaime just alluded that to Pete's request of having a radiator or condenser being a crash part. You got to let us know if it's not a crash part. Jaime, tell us it's not a crash part. And the same would go with, and maybe perhaps because the definition says non-mechanical, and that makes it not a radiator, not a crash part. But we need to figure that part out. The same thing with a headlight or a tail light. Today, are they crash parts or no? They are. You see? So we got to figure this out. Because a headlight today could be very mechanical.
Yes, Jaime Ramos, Bureau of Automotive Repair. So yes, you're right there, Gene. but currently, under the regulations, it's pretty much what constitutes the exterior of a vehicle that is defined as a crash part. That's why a radiator AC condenser currently is not defined as a crash part.
Because it's behind the grill?
No, it's because our current regulations define it as what constitutes the exterior of a vehicle.
Okay.
So any sheet metal, any
Okay.
plastic parts, anything that constitutes the exterior of a vehicle currently is what is defined as a crash part. So right now, if the question is an AC condenser, a radiator, is that a crash part? No, because our regulation defines it as an exterior, what constitutes the exterior of a vehicle.
So, in a bumper assembly, only the fascia is a crash part. The reinforcement and the absorber are not crash parts.
Yeah, I mean, technically you're looking at the exterior of vehicle. It depends on how you would look at it. Is that an assembly there that goes to that thing? If it's independent parts, and yeah, currently by our regulations, it's the exterior of a vehicle.
I think when you talk about the exterior of the vehicle, you're really talking about the outside of the vehicle, not the inside, not the seats, not the dashboard, not the headliner. No, that's the interior of the vehicle. The exterior of the vehicle would be anything bolted or welded to the exterior. And for example, the radiator support, using your theory, radiator support is not the exterior of the vehicle, as are the inner fender panels. They're not out on the outside.
Correct, but let me kind of also clarify that the regulation does say including some inner panels that go inner and outer panels on it. Our current regulations right there. So I would argue that the radiator support is part of an inner panel there, so it would be considered a crash part.
The only reason why radiators and air conditioning condensers probably should be considered as part of as a crash part is because anytime the collision gets as close as to the radiator support, it's going to include those parts. They're replaced in the body shop more than ever in the mechanical shop, and that's where they need to be.
Oh, good comment on that. I mean, right now they don't include that, but certainly we'll take that into consideration as we move forward with that.
Yeah, and that's the whole idea, is to take it into consideration and think about that, rather than not to argue the point whether it is or it isn't.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I think we should try and move on. We'll never get through it, but we could have just done a regulation just on the definition of crash part, it sounded like, and call it a day. That small steps, I think,
Yeah.
has proven itself just in our first item. Let's try and move on.
Before we do
Okay.
move on, Chief, so under P and under Q, you have some underlined items that are new.
Sure, I think he's going to go through those.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so can we get them on the screen? Or?
We do. We should
Okay.
actually do that
Thanks.
right now. I was going to take P and Q of the 3303 section. If you will, just let me go through both of them because they both interact with each
Yeah.
other, and then we will take comment. So the initial first sentence in P for the original equipment manufactured crash part or OEM crash part means a crash part made for or by the original vehicle manufacturer that manufactured, fabricated, or supplied a vehicle or a component part. That language has not changed. We added language for clarity. That's what a crash part is. The crash part, the added language would be the crash part must be recognized by the specific vehicle manufacturer as its own part or obtained through a distributor authorized by the vehicle manufacturer. Okay. And then whenever we went to Q, the original sentence of non-OEM equipment manufacturer aftermarket crash part or non-OEM aftermarket crash part means we struck out aftermarket crash parts not made for or by the manufacturer of the motor vehicle. So we added, when it says means, it means a new crash part that does not meet the definition of an OEM manufactured crash part or OEM crash part. So if I may surmise on that, there's there's two types of crash parts. We still have our original parts that are in 9884.9C of the Business and Professions Code, whereby it talks about that they can be identified as new, used, reconditioned, or rebuilt, right? And then for crash parts, either non-OEM or non-OEM aftermarket or OEM manufactured parts. So in essence, what this is saying is there's, again, is to provide clarity, is there's two types of crash parts. One is an OEM crash part, and one is a non-OEM crash part.
Question?
Sure.
Why was obtained through a distributor authorized by the vehicle manufacturer introduced?
Because of a lot of the stuff that has been going on over like some of the parts and where they're derived from. Specifically would be some of the alt OEM, opt OEM, surplus OEM parts. There's been replete amount of not only lawsuits but articles where some of those parts have been identified as being stolen and sold from markets. Some of the manufacturers do not recognize those parts as their own parts, and they don't authorize the distribution of those parts.
Jaime Ramos, Bureau of Automotive Repair. If I can add to that, we kind of had a mindset of adding that on there so that we just don't limit it to the vehicle manufacturer recognizing that part of its own, so that we try to eliminate an argument that how do I verify from the vehicle manufacturer that's one of their own parts. So just an added option to leave it open yet still clear as to what an OEM part would be considered.
That will hamstring us in certain ways. The repair, Gene Lopez with Seidner's Collision Center. And the hamstring would be that there are certain manufacturers who have surplus runs of their parts who sell them off to third-party distribution and would still consider them their originally equipped manufactured part, but it's sold through another source, not their wholesale dealer. And so we can make a purchase of that part, and we make that purchase through several different mechanisms. Some are required by the vehicle manufacturers. Ford and Chevrolet, Subaru and Volvo have their own certified collision repair networks. And to belong to that network, you have to use a certain platform to order your parts. OE Connection, Parts Trader, and so on. And so in some cases, those brand new parts through OE Connection could show up from a company called LKQ or a company called iPart. And they're bidding on those parts. And so it's an original part from a vehicle manufacturer that's through a different distribution system. You could be hamstringing us from ordering those parts that come to us at a discounted price.
I'm around with Bureau of Automotive Repair. You're right, as any regulation that we do could have some pros and cons to it. And we have to, that's why we're having, workshops to get some feedback on it. We're open to any other ideas. This is something that has come up. It's very, it's the Reparent G. It's the body shops that are reaching out to us and say, clarify it. They need the clarification. We have third-party vendors that are also reaching out saying, body shops are not buying from us. Insurance companies aren't letting them buy from us. So it's a hot topic that comes up that we have to find a way to categorize it. And instead of leaving a bunch of loopholes as to what may or may not classify the definition, we have to really find a way to put an end to it so there is no other, 5 million different categories of what you would classify a crash part as. So this is what was our attempt. It's a manufacturer. we've actually had some manufacturers say, how can your definition say that it's an OEM part, but we don't recognize it? Toyota, for example. Toyota says if you don't buy their parts from one of their dealerships, it is not their part and it's not OEM part. But according to our current regulations, if you buy some from a third-party vendor, it's made for or by that vehicle manufacturer. Overseas, probably, but it's still made by them. So, when you have Toyota saying your regulations currently contradicts our position, how are you dictating that that's our part when we're the ones that are the owners, pretty much, of the part? So that's why it was a good starting point. Is the vehicle manufacturer, they have to recognize it as their own, and if they don't, then I think that's a good starting point. But we're certainly open to any other language or input in there that we could, address the issue, as long as it's very clear on, makes it clear both to the industry, to the part vendors, and to insurance companies.
Yeah, thank you.
Are we good on those two? We move on to equipment requirements. 3351.5. Now, before I go into all this, I just want to recognize somebody at the table, because she does amazing work, and it's Holly. There's stuff all over the place on here. She's sitting down at that end, and it's like this thing moved all over the place, and she just was all over that. It's pretty neat to watch. So 3351.5 is equipment requirements for auto body repair shops. A is a new proposed language, and would be an amendment. An auto body repair shop shall have all the required equipment and current reference manuals for the types of vehicles being repaired. All auto body repairs shall be to vehicle manufacturer specifications. And before we take input, I want to say a couple things about that. They can obviously still sublet those repairs if they do not have the equipment to perform those repairs. Certainly it would be a good, prudent business practice to make sure that whoever they sublet it to had that equipment that's necessary. Otherwise, they would be responsible for those repairs. And then as far as all body repairs shall be to vehicle manufacturer specifications. This is what we were kind of talking about when we were talking about 3365A. This is under the equipment requirements. So when we have vehicle manufacturers, I'm going to use Toyota real quick, and they have specifications on a compression welder, or and they actually to burn through for the pinch welds. What they'll do is that they will tell you how long you can burn it through. It's usually timed in thousandths of seconds, like 0.032. And it'll tell you how big the nugget has to be specifically. And it will tell you the amount of pressure that has to be on that weld. And in the case that I'm kind of referring to, they want 1.3 added amount of welds, so about a third more welds in the area of that particular component I was looking at. They'll have very specific welding equipment. I read an article just recently, for example, on General Motors, whereby they're trying to, where you would normally put a plug weld with a MIG welder, they're wanting you to use a squeeze type resistance welder. And what they're doing is that they actually, they have a link to their actual repair procedure on that, and they're saying they give you a list of like 15 or more of the actual welding systems, and they say any one of these will work for our car, but that's what they're saying you need to use. So it's getting really specific. So in the spirit of that, the vehicle manufacturer specifications, it's also so that they're using the equipment as it is derived when it is in writing, a repair procedure, that they're actually using that. I grew up in the old days where you'd actually just use a compression welder and you'd do it and you'd hold it for as long as you thought necessary. I don't know anybody that can time it in that thousandths of a second repetitively. You just can't do that. So that would be the spirit of that. So I'll take any kind of input. Be great.
Jack Molodanoff. So a couple of comments. For the first sentence, Required equipment, that sort of, I tripped over that one, required, because when I see required equipment, are we saying the manufacturer now is going to specify the type of equipment you have to buy? Does that mean the repair shop has to buy from, what does required equipment mean? I was just struggling with it, and my only suggestion is, because I always like to come up with solutions, is delete required. So it will read, an auto body shop shall have the equipment and current reference, and just take out required, because I think that creates some confusion. I think it that's just a suggestion on that.
No, that's really good input.
The second sentence, that appears to be, we're dealing with now specifications, and that feels to me like 3365. All auto body repairs shall be to vehicle manufacturer specifications. Now, as I understand, there's some, you may not get some of the vehicle manufacturer specifications. They may not be provided, proprietary maybe, the measurements, something. So that is a pretty strong statement there. And I know that I was involved in 3365, so I know we spent a lot of time on that. And one of the things, and the general rule is you start with the manufacturer says here, this is the way you repair the car correctly and safely. But if there's a gap there, there's nothing there, they're not providing the information or something, there needs to be something else there to at least allow the shop to be able to do it correctly. And I think we came up with nationally recognized and accepted by the auto body industry, which gave that flexibility. So that second sentence feels like it shouldn't be there. It should be with 3365 type thing. But I think we need to do some work on that. It just seems so potentially very extreme and may cause some shops not to be able to repair vehicles. I mean, I know what the intent is, but I think it needs some work drafting.
Hi, thank you for your input. I was going to just respond to Jack real quick, and then I'll take Mr. Peters. When we talk about the specifications, and I know that listening to you, I agree that we can certainly look at some different language, but the spirit of that is that for the auto body repairs, there are some manufacturers that don't have a sectioning procedure, and there's usually typically 3 reasons why, or a couple reasons why. The engineer may already know that it can't be sectioned. They're not going to say anything. They might say, don't section it, right? And there's also the fact that maybe they crashed it and it didn't work out too good. So they don't do it there either. So in the spirit of that, it would be something that was in writing from the manufacturer, and certainly the language could be looked at. And thank you for the comment on that.
Charlie Peters, Clean Air Performance Professionals. You got my attention this time. Bureau of Automotive Repair 100 years ago ran cars in Southern California smog check where the factory procedure did not find the fault. So there are going to be occasions, no matter how good the manufacturers think they are, when you're going to require people to follow procedures that are invalid. They can be very strongly opposed to the customer and taking care of business and so on. So am I missing something here? Am I in the neighborhood of something that might be very important to consider?
It's certainly a consideration. I appreciate you bringing it up. I will tell you this, in the tenure that I've been in the collision industry, one of the things that never ceases to amaze me is the engineers that build these vehicles. You have airbag timing that's timed in milliseconds. You have, they're deploying at 200 miles an hour. You have a crash rate on the frame rail. And if you don't reset it back to the manufacturer's guidelines, that will alter that and potentially harm a consumer or the public, especially if they resell the car and maybe they didn't do the things right and the consumer gets the car and gets hurt in the vehicle.
The things that I ran across at the time was that the methodologies of repair are produced before the car. And so you end up with very possibly invalid requirements that by law the technician is required to follow. So you end up entrapped in never land, and you create a catch-22 that you can't get out of. And that needs some discussion, I think, if I'm dealing with the right comments.
I would just say to you that in collision repairs historically, and repair methodologies, they usually come a year to 2 years after the vehicle built, because finally they figure out we need to have some procedures. Sometimes it's really hard to get information on brand new repair procedures. It's usually a little delayed. So it's just kind of the opposite. They go, okay, well, we have it on the market, we better figure out a way to start fixing it, kind of thing, is what I'd see.
Yeah, hi, Gene Lopez again. So I agree with Jack, and I agree with Mr. Peters that in what I think the repairers would be concerned about are current reference manuals. You alluded to that some manufacturers don't have written procedures, and some manufacturers don't have these reference manuals at all. Jack alluded to measurements, for example. Vehicle manufacturers don't provide us with measurements. And we have to bring a vehicle back to its pre-accident condition with measurements included that come from third-party reference material, Chief Easy Liner, Car Liner, Select Bench. They go and reverse engineer a vehicle to get the dimensions of that vehicle so that we can bring it back to its pre-accident condition. And so, as I said, and as Jack alluded to, there may not be any current reference manuals available. And as Mr. Peters suggested, that maybe the manufacturer didn't have it right. He didn't use that word, but to that effect, the second sentence could prevent us from using recycled or used parts, because a vehicle manufacturer specifications may prevent us from using used parts. So that might be a consideration as well in this language.
Well, thank you very much for your comments. I'm kind of leaning towards what Jack was kind of mentioning earlier about the fact of maybe we could craft something in there that we're talking about, certain, like the equipment for one, identify that we're talking about equipment in this area, and just look at some different language overall. That would be, I could see us like chopping that.
And something that helped me with the last presentation. What was that? What was that called? Elm. So it would be pretty cool to incorporate some of Elm into the equipment requirements for a collision center, and it may be, and this is out there, and it's not what we're talking about today, but it may be that there are equipment requirements for a cosmetic repair station and equipment requirements for a collision repair station, where the cosmetic repair is only on crash parts, right? They don't go into the interior of a vehicle, and they get licensed that way. So that shop wouldn't have that squeeze type resistant spot welder that you're speaking of, because they never work on that car. And so it's something down the road, but when we speak about equipment requirements for auto body repair shops, maybe we have different classifications, just down the road.
Thank you for your comments on that. We'll take that into consideration. Thank you. If there's nothing else on the opening A, we'll talk about B, which used to be A, and I'm going to try and keep this as clear as I can. This is the one that we kind of just reorganized for corrosion protection. We took elements from number 1, number 2, and number 5, and we made the equipment capable of 1 through 5 using language from all three of those areas from the old regulation. The existing regulation, thank you. So realistically, when you go down, it's an auto body repair shop that performs automotive painting shall have all equipment and current reference manuals necessary to paint and repair non-structural damage, including but not limited to. And then we moved from one, the sentence, which is the exact same verbiage, corrosion protection application equipment with a comma, and then from two, and equipment capable of. And then we broke down, we took parts of the language from 2 to 5, and pretty much they remain the same. Number 1 was originally listed as part of number 2. I'm trying to make it's kind of a little complex. And so then we changed just the A and applying to a capital letter and made a list of these things. So it would be applying exterior corrosion. They have to be capable of applying exterior corrosion resistant primers, anti-corrosion compounds, and top coats. 2 would now be treating enclosed areas on unibodies and frame assemblies, including pressurized spray equipment. Number 3 would be for reaching full length inside enclosed areas. And number 4 would be a 360-degree spray application. We did get rid of the language about the wand because we don't know what the future will hold as far as that, but we want it to be able to go into the cavities and be able to spray that corrosion in areas that you can't readily access. And then a fan-shaped pattern spray application. So all those are maintained the same, pretty much, aside for the list, and moved to make them more easily read for anybody that's looking at that regulation for information. So if there's nothing on those, I was going to move to it used to be B, is now C. An auto body repair shop that is performing structural repair shall have all the repair, measuring, and testing equipment and current reference manuals necessary to diagnose, section, replace, or repair structural damage. Added language would be to vehicle manufacturer specifications, including but not limited to. We kind of already talked.
Yeah, we talked about that, but just to reinforce it, there may be no vehicle manufacturer specifications available.
And then for number 1, we busted out the three-dimensional measuring system. This language already exists in current regulation that can locate points with the dimensions of length, width, and height relative to, and it used to say 3 defined reference planes, changed it to center line, body zero, and datum plane.
Dave?
That's terminology used within the repair guidelines and the training that the technicians go through. So that's not wrong. But to your point, is that legislative?
I don't know. I'm not familiar with body zero.
Well, and I've heard it zero body. So there you go. Basically, that's a portion of the vehicle from where you measure forward or rearward on the vehicle.
Right.
Okay, so that's body zero. So wherever that 0 point is, you're measuring from that for the length of the vehicle, not center line, which is from side to side comparison, or datum, which is a height measurement. So the attempt here is to maybe define that 3 defined reference planes. This is calling them what they are in the attempt here. So body 0 might be the only one there that is not industry recognized everywhere.
Yeah.
Datum and centerline, I would think, is.
Centerline plane, datum
Yeah.
plane, and
Right.
and zero plane.
Yeah, it could be 0 plane as well. But that's what the intent is. I recognize what you were talking about.
If you have any kind of suggested language, we'd certainly take that input that is more universal, because I know ICARs all over the United States and a lot of other places.
Commonly, the term of 3-dimensional measuring is a term that is used pretty universal.
Yeah, and we say that in the very first
Right,
sentence.
three-dimensional measuring
Well,
system.
I'm talking about
And
for
you're
the
just
body
breaking
zero.
out what that means, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any other suggested language for body zero that's more, maybe user-friendly, if you will?
Was there pardon my interruption,
Yeah.
was there something that, three defined reference planes, in measuring a vehicle, we're given those three defined reference planes, right? The measurement companies give us center line, they give us zero, and they give us a datum plane. So I don't know that you have to the addition of center line, body zero, and datum plane was recognized in three defined reference planes. I don't know why you would strike those and add the three names.
Well, often it's just used length, height, and width.
That too.
And that's about as simple as you can make it right there without calling them the technical terms.
Yeah.
Length, height, so three-dimensional, length, height, and width might be your answer here.
Thank you for your input. We're going to move on to number 2, if everybody's ready. A 4-point anchoring system located in the center section of the vehicle is new language and capable of holding a vehicle in a stationary position during structural and/or, I believe we did the and/or is additional, body pulls, which is suitable for the types of vehicles being repaired. Everything that's not underlined is original language.
As we move forward with vehicles, lightweight vehicles with advanced high-strength steels and ultra-high-strength steels, this 4-point anchoring system could still be on the floor of a body shop. I mean, they could still consider floor pots as a 4-point anchoring system. And a collision repairer who doesn't know that could add collateral damage to that vehicle using floor pots. So we may want to continue to look at this and not just call it a 4-point anchoring system, although that's what takes place on a frame machine. We may want to add language that gets the vehicle off the floor and onto a bench.
Thank you. Yeah, whenever this was being proposed, one of the things is the reason, me being a field rep for a long time for BAR, we would see people pulling vehicles attached to like tow hooks and things like that off of,
Yeah.
on the floor like you're talking about, and not even anchoring in the center of the vehicle. And we're transferring energy into areas we're not supposed to be when we're
Yeah.
pulling and things
Yeah.
like that. And so, I hear what you're saying, and I'll take your input, and we'll look at that. But that's the main reason, is because you're right about the floor pulling and the actual just laying it on the floor and pulling it. It's a problem. And I will say something before we move on to 3, is that when you have the airbag sensors, and they're now mounted, a lot of them are mounted on the upper outer rails, and they're in front of the apron and stuff. And some folks are getting either paid, or they're deciding that they can pull dimensionally that area, and that affects airbag timing if it's not set back correctly. It's really crucial that there's a measurement in that area, because obviously if that airbag timing's off because that rail's back or damaged or in the wrong position, it can change and affect that airbag for that consumer. So we certainly, that's one of the reasons, is because it has to be a little bit more modernized. That's kind of like what I consider old school, the floor stuff.
Which reminded me about the supplemental restraint systems and disabling an airbag. We have to disable those, right, when we're repairing? So, wherever that language is at, I don't know if we need to make an exception during the repair of a vehicle.
Well, we'll talk about that in a second.
Okay,
We're gonna go
oh,
over that, but
okay,
yeah, we're just
thanks.
a little ahead. Yep. So, I believe we're on number 3, which is equipment capable of making multiple. The language that got struck in this proposal is body and then it says multiple directional, which is a new word. Structural and or body pulls simultaneously is a new word, and or body pulls. Excuse me. Not the pulls, just the and or body. And the spirit behind that is that when you see folks and they're out and they're pulling vehicle structures and they're using come-alongs and or friction jacks and things like that, you know, typically your ram's going to be about a 10,000-pound ram to be able to realign the vehicle, and certainly some of those folks can accomplish the amount of energy to pull the vehicle back in specification. So if you're going to pull somebody's frame or unibody structure, it's very imperative that that vehicle is set back within dimensions, especially in modern vehicles. So if there's nothing on that, I'll move to number 4. This is the language that is proposed to be stricken. Sorry, Jack, but back in the day, number 4 would have been very appropriate, as it said, a MIG welder, if you will, and with an output of at least 110 amps for unibody repairs, and 200 amps for conventional frame repairs are capable of meeting trade standards for the work being performed. And equipment capable of generating enough pulling force is the new language proposed. Enough pulling force to realign the vehicle structure to manufacturer specifications. So,
You've gone from talking about MIG welding and the amount of performance for unibody repairs and the amount of performance for conventional frame repairs to talking about generating enough pulling force. The two, so we're taking MIG welding out altogether?
no, sir. Next is 5, which covers welding. It got renumbered. It's,
So why don't you just have equipment capable up there in the 4-point anchoring system?
really had that like that at one point in our group, and I think that it was just easier to break it out, so it was just easier. It seemed like it read easier whenever we put it together. It didn't flow as well, so it was just a matter of moving it around.
Isn't 3 and 4 the same thing, described differently?
No. 3 is
Capable of making
okay.
multiple directional, structural, and or body pulls, capable of generating enough pulling force.
So 3 looks like it's talking about conjunctive pulling, being able to pull in different angles simultaneously, whereas 4 talks about making sure that you have a machine capable of all the force needed.
Yeah,
That's correct.
I see that now, but to me, it's 27. I mean, it's you guys.
Originally, we had it as 1, and it was getting a little bit long sentence, and it just seemed to flow a little bit better. But certainly, we can take a look at that, putting it back as 1 sentence. I think we had it as, if I'm not mistaken, as 1 sentence conjoining number 3, item 3.
Yeah.
I think it went multiple directional pulls, and the capable of generating enough pulling force were all 1. But I think we kind of separated it because we're talking about 2 different things, even though we all know it's kind of like the same thing.
Yeah, thanks.
So if we're ready, we could move to number 5. 5, the struck out part of 5 is all that corrosion protection language that we talked about up at, I believe, back at number 2, I believe. Isn't it? Back at letter B, sorry. So number 5 is new proposed language, and it says we struck out everything about the corrosion all the way through the 360-degree spray application and spray heads capable of a fan-shaped pattern. So the new language there would be all welding and panel bonding equipment and materials required for the types of vehicles being repaired. And the thought process was that when we talked about like the MIG welder and we talked about certain amps and stuff, they have gotten so many, people from collision realize how many different welds are being performed nowadays. And to try to make it more plain language so it would catch anything that they're working on as far as being able to actually have that equipment to restore the vehicle as it was intended, kind of thing.
Yeah, Jack Molodanoff again. I like the broadness of it. I'm not a tech, but all welding and panel bonding equipment. So does that include everything like that we can even think of? I know aluminum, carbon fiber. If down the line we come up with some sort of kryptonite material, it would cover everything, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's the intention. And then of course the material and stuff would be for your self-piercing rivets and the actual rivets that are appropriate for that particular, like aluminum procedure or carbon fiber. Are we ready to move on to the last proposed amended regulation? That would be, it's going to be 3367. Again, it used to state inflatable restraint systems, semicolon airbags. It's now being named, proposed to be named supplemental restraint systems. There's some new proposed language in A, which is, I'll read. It's for purposes of this section, a supplemental restraint system contains the following components: airbags, airbag sensors, computer modules, inflatable restraint systems, seat belts, seatbelt pretensioners, seat structural components, and steering columns. It's a pretty inclusive list it's identifying actually what those components that we're talking about are and how important they are to maintain. At the last bag work group, I had mentioned that a lot of manufacturers, after a seat belt has been used, will require a replacement and or an inspection of it at some point, and not always, but most times they do. So that was kind of encompassing all that in that regulation.
Occupant sensors, is that part of the seat structural component?
It can be, yes.
Okay.
Yes. Because we have smart airbags and stuff now, of course, and all that kind of
That's
technology.
occupant sensor is a pretty critical component. If that's included as seat structural components, then good.
Seat structural or airbag component? Yes.
Well,
Because it says airbag sensors, which would be any.
Yes, it'll be airbag sensor.
Airbag-
So
any
one of
airbag
those
sensor.
two would cover the occupant sensor.
well, an airbag sensor is not an occupant sensor. An airbag sensor is an airbag sensor would work whether or not there's an occupant in that seat.
It's a sensor that affects the deployment of the airbag, whether to or not to deploy.
Yes, sir. That would cover everything, yes. Thank you very much. If there's nothing else on the A, we have new proposed language for this in B. And it's procedures for the repair and installation of a supplemental restraint system shall be performed in accordance with manufacturer's service specifications. If there's nothing on that, then I'll move to C.
Does it matter if it's the vehicle manufacturer or supplemental restraint system manufacturer?
Yeah, I don't know that I'm aware of any aftermarket airbag for a manufacturer that has a different procedure other than the manufacturer would prescribe. Does that make sense? Sorry, it's getting later for me.
Yeah, it's just, and you've got vehicle manufacturer everywhere else, so.
Yeah, we could definitely look into that. So if we're looking at the C, which used to be A, so there's not much language that's changed in this at all. An automotive repair dealer shall not install or reinstall or distribute or sell any airbag which is known or which by the exercise of reasonable care should be known to have been previously deployed and which is part of and we got rid of inflatable and put supplemental restraint system. That's the only change besides for it being moved to C. Oh, yes, sir.
Somewhere else in regulation, because this, this is ARDs, right? Is somewhere else in regulation prevent, like a wrecking yard, recycling yard, something like that from selling to a consumer to install in their own car? I mean, I know a consumer can do what the consumer does, but is a recycling facility barred from selling those? Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, you get an airbag that's deployed, right? And you don't want your steering wheel looking ugly, so you go to the wrecking yard and you pick one up that, it's not deployed, but it doesn't work.
Sure. Certainly if that wrecking yard, which a lot of them do have an ARD, then it comes into play.
I guess that's true, right? This is bar regulations and they wouldn't fall under it. Okay.
Thank you very much for your comment. So if
Is there a California regulation against installing a used airbag?
there is, it's in vehicle code, but I don't have it right in front of me.
Should that be introduced? Yeah, should that be introduced here?
It's something to consider, yes. When we talk about, in a second, when we talk about D, it's pretty much, it overrides anything that the state has to say because it's a federal mandate.
I actually like that idea. Vehicle code doesn't necessarily fall under our jurisdiction, but I think to incorporate that provision in this regulation would be.
Or, we can definitely do that.
I like that idea. You said that vehicle code?
Yeah, I want to say vehicle code.
Yeah. So we have the ability to enforce a vehicle code, but we got to bring it into a regulations. Yeah, so I think that I like that.
Thank you very much. So if we're ready, we'll move on to D, which is a new proposed language. Except where an exemption is obtained from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. I'll start over. Except where an exemption is obtained from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, an automotive repair dealer shall not knowingly disable or render any supplemental restraint system component inoperable or install a replacement part that would cause the system to not function as designed by the vehicle manufacturer. So that's, I just got to say, I like one of the real fast note. It was I was aware of a complaint from a consumer whereby they had an insurance claim and the side airbag curtains and a few other the bags deployed during a wreck, and there was a lot of money paid for the repairs, and the gentleman got in a subsequent crash in the same area, and when the secondary shop pulled the vehicle apart, the airbags were packed with foam and not replaced, and when they were not replaced, then just financially also fortunately, the gentleman was doing okay as far as the crash. But financially, I believe it was around an $8,000 bill that the insurance company would not pay because they paid for it and they weren't installed. So you wind up actually incurring that expense. So this part of that regulation is pretty doggone important.
It is. And that was just an evil person who put foam in there. I'm just, so at some point, we have to disable these bags when we're working on the vehicle. So if we could put something in there about during repairs, I would just hate for I would hate for someone to say, hey, you can't take that airbag out to repair the car because the regulation says you can't knowingly disable.
So I will address that. That's a really great observation. And maybe it's something we need to include for California. I do know that on the federal, when they do the actual exemption, not only do they state in their regulations, which I don't know if you've gone through federal regulations, but they're really complex in a way, but they talk about the fact that if a shop's or a repair shop is actually repairing a vehicle, it's okay to do that, okay, during that time. And then the other part of that would be the fact that they also talk about if you don't know and you're an ARD and you plan on doing this kind of work, the exemption comes to the consumer, from what I read in writing, and it tells them that they will pretty much hold them harmless as far as going after them for violating federal law. And so they should be able to produce that to you before you go and just pull out airbag systems or do something that might be inappropriate without that exemption.
We add knowingly permanently disable or render any supplemental? And then because I mean, it's same thing on the repair side, right?
Yes.
I've got to disable airbags to remove steering columns, those kinds of things.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But it's not permanently disabled.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of what I was going to, saying that we might want to do that, but it may cover it because we're talking about their laws already. But correct. Correct. That makes total sense.
One quick point, sorry, Jaime Ramos, Bureau of Automotive Repair. As far as the permanently, I think we kind of discussed that originally, but there'll be actually body shops that an airbag is on special order. They will disable their airbag system so that because they have a screaming customer, I need my car, I need my car. So in that particular case, it wouldn't be permanently disabling it. It'd be temporarily disabling it until the airbag comes in. And what we're saying is they shouldn't be doing that because now even though the customer right now says, I want my car, as soon as they get in an accident, you put me into this position on there. So,
Yeah.
so I mean, I like the suggestion, but I think maybe we find a neutral ground where we can, still hit it home. I like what you're saying there, but we've had a couple scenarios like that, and that's why we kind of struck it, but maybe we can find a happy medium to address that.
So if there's no other input, we'll go to the very last. The only change was that we took and made E, which used to be B in that regulation originally, and the proposed just moving it to E. It's the same disciplinary action authority and all that was already in our current regulations. Certainly.
Bud Rice, Quality Tune-Up Shops. So when we were talking about D, and even when we were talking about C, and now we're talking about E. It's almost like we were talking about getting airbags from from a dismantler or something like that. And when this sentence in C says previously deployed, I think what the discussion was over here is if you take the airbag out of service because you're repairing something, and then you're putting it back into service, it's almost like an airbag was previously deployed or placed in service. Because if you went to a record, you got an airbag, that airbag, you're now trying to put that back into service again, which either we want or don't want. But you can't get whacked for taking an airbag out of service because you're trying to fix something, and now you're going to put it back into service, but some other rule says you can't do that. The guy's in a wedge again because he can't take it out of service and then put it back into service if some of this terminology makes it unclear that he has the ability to do that. I guess that's what I'm saying.
I take your comments and I appreciate them, and we'll certainly see if it needs some tweaking.
Do we have any comments or questions from our webcast? Okay, we do not. Maybe we can put the email addresses back up on the screen for anybody that may need them. Thank you.
Next steps. You want to encourage comments maybe if anything comes to mind in the next couple of weeks, let's say, because at some point we want to move forward and not wait
Absolutely.
months for the next set of comments. But anyone has comments, certainly get them to any of the three participants or individuals listed, the technical side more to Michelle and Mark, and obviously any specific language, I guess, to Holly. But beyond that, where do we go from here? And I know it, but I think kind of a rhetorical question, but I think we have obviously some work to do just in finalizing the regs. And then there's all the justification work that also has to happen.
Correct. So our work group next steps are to meet and consider all of the comments that have been so helpful and welcomed, both in this workshop as well as any that come over the next week or two, because we all know that sometimes you wake up in the middle of the night and think, oh, what about this? And that's why we want to make sure that you know that we're available to you. So again, our work group will continue to work, and we'll work with Holly, our legislative expert here, to look at the language suggestions. Mark?
Yes, absolutely. And not only take in all your suggestions, I know some of us are currently working on the future regulations that we're talking about briefly in a bit, and continue to do that because the industry is changing so rapidly and so quick, and I've said this before, but it's true. It's just like this automated driving systems. I have a big passion for that because I can see what's coming. And it's that one for me is a really big deal, and I keep working on it in my mind and all my spare time and stuff. So we're working on a whole bunch of stuff and trying to make sure that there's just better regulations for the industry and consumers and everybody in the state of California. So that's kind of what we're looking at.
I don't want to take away from your part of the show, but Holly is very familiar. She's gone through the regulatory training. There's a lot involved. We're still, once we take in some additional comments, let's say in the next couple of weeks, and the work group reconvenes over the next few weeks to finalize, let's say close to final, this language, then we send that forward along with they call an initial statement of reasons. It's a justification. It looks at every provision, even just simple renumbering and relettering has to be justified. And that's a pretty simple process, but that just goes to show you the extreme that we go through, and any agency goes through in modifying or introducing new regulations. We take that forward to our legal counsel. We get an initial read from them. That can take some time. They might have some comments back, not only on the language itself, but also our justification. You didn't go into enough detail about alternative considerations, for example, or leaving status quo, or doing a different, going in a different direction. I don't think so. This is fairly technical in nature. We wouldn't get that kind of feedback necessarily, but there might be some cleanup. And then then after that, we make some changes, and then we'll go back to, after we've gotten the legal informal kind of review, we'll send it back to the department for a comprehensive review through every kind of facet of the organization that might have some need to look at this. Our legislative office, legal gets another crack at it. Our budget office, they'll look at both fiscal impacts to us as an organization. Are you just going to bankrupt the Bureau, for example? No, obviously not, but they'll look at that. They'll also look at economic impact on the industry. Are we going to introduce a whole new set of regulations that's going to cause everybody in the collision repair industry to go out of business or something like that? No, I don't think that's what we're talking about here either, but that's the kind of stuff that they'll look at. Who else looks at it at DCA? I think that's pretty much, but that takes time, coordination of that. Then potential other changes are needed, and then once we clear DCA, then we go to our agency. That's how this is structured. We go to our agency, which is Department of Consumer Affairs reports to. That's a pretty quick review. They've got legal counsel over there as well, but that's fairly quick. It's usually about 30 days or so. And then eventually we file with the Office of Administrative Law. That's the clearinghouse, if you will, for all regulations that get adopted into law for every state agency. And then that regulation, that proposed final language, gets posted, noticed to the public, and that begins a formal, this is a very informal stage, but that'll begin a very formal 45-day initially, 45-day public comment period. And we welcome, everything has to come back in writing, or we usually schedule a hearing in conjunction with that, where we hear additional input on that final, what we consider the final language. But again, it could be modified again based on those comments that come forward in that formal comment period. And then we might make additional changes based on some great comment that comes out of that process. And then that'll not reset the clock, but give an additional 15 days to comment on any changes. And they're limited to just the changes that were made since the closure of the initial 45 days. So it's a long process. Jack's been saying it can take a couple years to get through it. I don't think this one seems pretty cut and dry for the most part, although we did stumble upon the definition of crash part, did we not? Yes. So, there'll be some things like that, but I think our objective always is to iron all of those and air it out ahead of time in these informal settings, because the real difficult part of adopting regulation can happen once you get into the formal process and you're near the finish line and you haven't worked with your stakeholders at all. And then you basically got to go start all over again and go back to the drawing board. We do a lot of work on the front end to avoid that, and that's why sometimes, and I agree with you. That's why sometimes it looks like the regulations take a lot longer, is because we involve people earlier on. If we did this all in the dark and didn't involve our stakeholders, we'd cut down. It would look like a shorter time frame. But to be honest with you, and I don't know what other regulatory agencies do, but we feel it critical to making sure that we get a good, clean package approved, that we have essentially buy-off from all of our stakeholders. So that's a lot of front-end work that takes a lot of time. So anyway, after, I should just finish by saying, once the formal process is completed, we have what they call, I mentioned an initial statement of reasons that's done on the front end. You have a final statement of reasons wherein you, the agency, us, Bureau of Automotive Repair, has to respond to all of the public comments in writing that we got and have that part of the public record. And then that gets filed back. Everybody looks at that again at DCA. And then that doesn't take a lot of time, but it does take some time. And then it gets filed back with OAL. And then they eventually, hopefully, sign off on the package. And then it gets filed with the Secretary of State's office, and it gets adopted. Well, it gets adopted by OAL, but then it doesn't take effect until it gets sent over to the Secretary of State's office, usually, I think, 30 days after the OAL adoption process. So that's it. Anyway, those are the next steps after we finish our internal work to get this draft. But there's a lot of work still that goes into this. But many opportunities to comment along the way, both informally and formally. Okay, that's all I had.
Open comments, open discussion at all? Or?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gene Lopez with Sidner's Collision Center. So I'm excited about this. I not part of BAG any longer, and we didn't get a lot of time to review this. So in future workshops, if we could have a little more lead time to look at some of the staff's recommendations or revisions, amendments to the regulations, that would be helpful. And it sounds like we're going to continue to work on other regulations or create new regulations down the road. And in doing so, I hope we can take a look at the Business and Professional Professions Code, Chapter 20.3, under automotive repair, 9880 through 9889.68. In particular, 9889.52, where the licensees have 4 requirements. That they have a city or county business license, that they have a state or board equalization identification or resale number, that they have an Environmental Protection Agency hazardous waste permit number, and that they have an air quality management district spray booth permit number. We need a lot more than that to repair a vehicle today. And the Bureau should know what repairers have today to repair their vehicles, like all the different welding equipment that are required on all the different vehicles today. I think that the repair stakeholders would embrace this, to know that the bar knew what kind of equipment we had. And if we have the correct equipment to repair the vehicles that are not only technologically advanced, but even before, the 2012 vehicle or the 2013 vehicle, I don't know that the bar knows what we have in our facilities. And the current climate is one that, while DRP environment is still very strong, certified collision repair networks through vehicle manufacturers is gaining a lot of steam. And in order to be part of the Ford or the General Motors or the Subaru or the Volvo or Fiat Chrysler, you have to have specific tools that are mentioned in the regulation, right? But I think in order to belong to one of those networks, you have to have proof that you have that equipment. I think it's time for the Bureau to know what that equipment is, and that repairers who get licensed by the Bureau can prove that they have that equipment.
Thanks, Gene. Those are BMP sections, I think you mentioned,
they are.
right? Yeah, so
Yeah.
obviously, anything that would expand on that list would have to be the legislature, but I don't think that means that we couldn't add to it through regulations, perhaps.
Well, and I'm thinking, so all those vehicle manufacturers that I mentioned, I'm thinking that the application to become or renew as an automotive repair dealer, you got to provide that list. I mean, it wouldn't be that much to add a page to your application to renew, or a page to the application to apply to become a new dealer, and have that list on that application. Tell us what you have.
And are there any additional comments before we wrap up here? Okay, we thank you all for coming today again, and your contributions. We do encourage you to continue to reach out to us with any additional comments or questions that you may have. Mark, anything else from you before we close?
Oh, I'm good. I just think there was a lot of good input, and thank you for that. And we'll go back and look at what we need to look at and address it as necessary.
Yeah, and rest assured, we will be continuing to work on the things we talked about today, as well as many other items we have on our agenda through our internal work group. Thank you again.